and then we will enter into a time of broad overview. Okay, so this is the first clip. These are all readily available online. If we have YouTube, you shouldn't have any problem getting this. Socially engaged. A lot of times you find that people coming out from Latin America, from Africa, have major social issues. But their social issues are always filtered through their pietistic lens. How are we helping them adjust to that reality? How can we help them see there's a need for this kind of relationship? A lot of the training that you get outside of North America is very much into pietistic approach, but very little into how can you apply that. There are a number of reasons for that, but one of the primary reasons is political control. There is very clear separation between politics and social justice issue and what the church can actually do. So how do we help them here in the free world, help people from that part of the world deal with this particular issue? Next. Globally aware and contextually sensitive. I've taught in North America right now, coming into my third year. I find that North Americans need to engage more into the world. We are too much thinking that the church down the road is the whole world. Far from it. I think they need to open up their mindset, they need to open up their viewpoints. There needs to be a healthy engagement, a healthy correction of who they are and what they are. The Super Bowl, you cannot be world champion of the Super Bowl when you're only one country playing among yourselves. That's not the world. That's the reality that I always say, okay, alright, I must, sorry, you know. I love the Super Bowl, so don't get me wrong, okay? I love the Super Bowl. I do cheer for the Dallas Cowboys. I like them a lot. Okay, alright, so, but being globally aware is very helpful and very important for the 21st century. So, what should be our agenda as educators? I think one, we need to strengthen the concept of vocational call and not merely an occupational possibility. Yes, times are hard. Churches are still looking for people to serve. But I think when we help our people understand the whole sense of vocational call, they last longer and they find a stronger purpose in their ministry. When I work with students, I always tell them, this is not a job. If it is a job, you will work 8 to 5 and you forget about it after that. But what we do matters to the world. What we do shapes the world. What we do shapes the community. It has to be a vocational call. We need to ensure that the students we get understand this call. Because if not, they will not put in the effort that is needed to be transformers. Not the cartoon transformers, but the transformer of the situation that they find themselves in. We need to help them develop broad-ranging skills. Baylor has gone through, or is going through, a major curriculum review. I'm very proud to be associated with that. And we have looked into the various curriculum that's out there. And we talked about the need to develop broad-ranging skills. It is not enough to just be able to diagnose, acquire problem in terms of vocal techniques, but also to be able to communicate with the sound man or sound team, to be able to use languages like and, frequency, whatever, riffs, all that stuff, and also to be able to engage in different types of music from around the world. The world is a very, very small place. We need to begin to engage, and we need to enable our students to travel afar and serve. You need, like I mentioned earlier on just now, The Global South has many, many Christians, but there are no institution and there are no people available. We can send our people out, provided they have the necessary skills. Because we do not want a fish out of water situation for our graduates that go out from us. We need to enable them to face what is out there. As such, we need to facilitate in cross-cultural exposure. This is a critical component that I find most church music schools do not engage in. Even where I am right now in Emmanuel, we don't do that, and that's very sad, and that's something that I'm hoping to address. I'm very excited to know that Baylor has done it, because I've been part of it. We need to get our people out there so that they can see for themselves a different Christian spirituality, because that will transform them, that will get their classmates excited, and that's how the whole program will get excited about all these changes that are coming. Lastly, we need to understand the needs of the Global South. And we have a role to play. If we are brothers and sisters, we need to lend a helping hand to help them. I know this conference is about undergrad church music program. I like to use the term basic church music training, because most of the people who are serving in the churches out there do not have a church music degree. They may have a bachelor's degree in some other fields, but they so happen that they can play the piano. They are drafted to teach piano playing in a seminary setting, or they are drafted to teach voice in a seminary setting, or they are drafted to, or not drafted, they are called, strongly persuaded by the pastors to serve in the church. They have no church music training. So the whole concept of undergrad church music training is a privilege. It does not exist outside of North America. Outside of North America, they may have a music training and then they are serving the church. There's no attempt at integrating theology with music. So we need to think, how can we then facilitate that process? If we have a program that can train people in church music at a basic level, that's what we are talking about. How can we engage these international people that are coming in? Do our universities and colleges facilitate their coming in? Can we petition and work with our state government to look into this particular aspect? You know it's very difficult for countries to come into North America. And here I'm very excited to know that Calvin College has done some work in Hong Kong, where the symposium moves from Grand Rapids to Hong Kong. And so I know in their first, I'm thinking about it, so I know. The first time they organized it, they had 700 people. That most of them are not able to come into North America. So for us who are church music educators, the world, like Charles Wesley says, truly is our parish. How prepared are we? How prepared are we to advocate? How prepared are we to enable that to happen? So that we don't just train our own people, but we train our own people to bless the nations. At the same time, we train people from other nations so that they can be a blessing. And it is when we do that, when we have that vision, that's what matters. So, over this time, very good.
I recall from our previous meeting some years ago that there was great value in our discussion following these presentations, and so this is our time to both react to what we've heard. This is a safe environment in which to share ideas and brainstorm, and we encourage that. And so this being our first one, it's always the awkward one as we get to know each other and make those things happen. So let me just offer a couple of thoughts here as I was listening to Swee Hong. Thank you for that. And just see where you want to take the discussion. He concluded with those last 3 points. Maybe that's a good jumping off point for us. How can we understand the needs of the Global South? How can we address the need for comparable educational institutions? How can we address the need for appropriately equipped leadership? Any thoughts? Maybe you've already done some thinking on this. Maybe you already have a way of reaching out and going outside. Yes, sir. Take off, Bill.
I have some thoughts. One challenge in all of this is that I mean, the easiest thing for us to do as music educators would be, as we have contact with internationals, is that we impose our system of music on them. And that's in the Chinese worship. I didn't recognize the worship course, but that was a very Western worship course. And I know with the internet and everything else, it's become very global. But my friend and some of your friends, John Boozer, has done a lot of work in the area of what's called ethnodoxology. You know, where the goal is to immerse yourself in a culture and learn their heart music. And that's the term they use, the heart music, and begin to raise up composers within their system of music, rather than taking our Fanny Crosby and Chris Tomlin songs and exactly the way we do things over and inject them into their culture. So it just creates another level of challenge for us in interacting with internationals, I think, that are very important.
But we have that same challenge here. I mean, I think that I very much agree with what you're saying. It's almost, the first clip was almost kind of disturbing to me. And you know, what it reminds me of is when the first time I had experience teaching students from Korea, and to learn that the tradition of their kind of second generation, the tradition of their parents, was really what the missionaries had brought over. It's a fascinating and a sad thing in many ways. But this notion of indigenous, something being indigenous, I see a great cross-cultural conversation where we need to be engaged in what is indigenous to the cultures that our North American students speak to. I mean, because I think we have those same issues. So I don't see this as an international issue. I mean, as an international student issue. I think it is something that we all need to be kind of wrapping our heads around. Is how do we, you know, are we bringing faith, or are we bringing a culture of faith? So that's, I really agree with what you're saying, but I think it's a broader reaching challenge in being indigenous.
Can you speak about just the Asians? Because a lot of the Asian students that I've met, some of them met a lot, but the ones I have met, are not always interested. I mean, they like doing that, and that has become, I guess, their heart scene or whatever. So,
Yeah.
and how, it's kind of hard to get that conversation.
I think what we need to understand is that outside of North America, we actually value the missionaries a great deal. We value what they have transmitted to us, because they brought us out of darkness into light. And if you know the deprecating nature of Asians, Africans, Latin Americans, we actually follow what they tell us to do, and we follow it to the letter, not just the spirit. So if you go to any church outside of North America, to Brazil, to Hong Kong, wherever, you will find the mainstream music will be translated Western material. Whether it be hymns or choruses from Chris Tomlin, or even in Thailand, you will have Chris Tomlin translated into Thai. That is how we honor them, because we see the Western culture tied very closely to Christianity. Whether you believe it or not, but that's how we see it. I mean, that's how Asians see it. So you find that when you tell an Asian you need to sing something from your culture, heaven forbid. Why? Because for the longest time we've been told that our culture is pagan and heathens. We cannot sing those stuff. I received a note recently from Michael Horn, and we were talking a little bit about mooncake festivals, you know. Because this month is mooncake festivals, and he said, well, you know, if you are coming to the US, bring a mooncake for me. I said, asked me whether I celebrate mooncake. I said, yes, we eat mooncakes year-round, not just this particular month. But as Chinese, as Chinese Christians, we don't celebrate mooncake festival because it has religious connotations to it. It talks about how an empress became deified and queen of heaven. So we don't celebrate mooncake festival, but we eat the cakes, but we don't celebrate.
I noticed in a very short amount of time I've been able to be in Singapore, and we talked about the worship against the culture, and we had a discussion about Mooncake Festival. The students from the large cities said, yes, we should participate in Mooncake Festival. Students from the villages said, no, we shouldn't. That has an echo that sounds a bit familiar to how we look at the flexibility or not of doctrine, even here.
Yes.
Could you speak to that? Why was that from larger cities, yes, we should do Mooncake Festival, from smaller villages, no, we shouldn't?
Because in bigger cities, it's a much more pluralistic society. People tend to be more open. There's much more engagement with the West. There's much more like what you're feeling, your sentiment of, oh no, you really need to relook at your culture and use it to glorify God. Missionaries or people who visit Asian and Latin American or African countries tend to go to cities. And that's where the impact will be felt. Whereas where you are cut off from the rest of globalization or westernization, you don't get that kind of message. So for them to be differentiated from their neighbor who are not Christians, they have to hold on to a sense of identity. So it is, the practice is not so much a question of practice, but a more of identity differentiation. It is an important topic I'm working on. So for example, if you are a rural Christian, how do you differentiate yourself from your Buddhist neighbor if you are singing the same song? That's not going to happen. It's like saying that your Muslim neighbor is going to do a chant, and you as a Christian are going to do the same chant but with different texts. Contrafactum does not work in that kind of situation because there is no identity differentiation. And in any society, particularly with major religions, there will always be differentiation.
But that's the same argument in our churches, the resistance to rock and roll sounds in the congregation, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's the same, that resistance within our church. I think it goes to a deeper level. I think in some ways it's a theology of missions. Do we find Christ already present in those other cultures? Or are we bringing Christ to that culture?
Right.
And there you see reflected some of the differences in missions approaches going from the 19th century or present, what have you. And real conflict. I mean, honest differences by good people. You know, on is Christ already present, and we're trying to find Christ within that culture, or are we bringing Christ to them?
I think there's an interesting thing with young people, students, that they don't seem to have these compartments in their culture. I was in Jordan in 2006, and we were at a campground, it was a Christian campground. It's Muslim nation, but a little bit more freedom. And we were awakened after, in the midst of our jet lag, with some drumming and singing and dancing going on out in the courtyard. So I asked one of the folks there, I said, what is going on? And I discovered that where two or more young people on a drum are gathered together, they would do this. And they said, oh, they've taken popular folk songs and they put Christian words to them. And they enjoyed it. They're not as locked in. They're not as worried about whether it's overlapping culture. Another interesting cultural thing, when I was in Midwestern Seminary, many Korean students began coming to us, and I'm in class talking about the conflict between traditionalism and contemporaryism and hymns or choruses and stuff like that. And so I asked one of the students, Korean students, I said, tell me about the conflict in your Korean church. And he said, well, it really is whether we're going to sing in English or not. Young people want to sing in English. We want to sing in Korean. They all sang the same stuff. It was about English.
Talk a little bit about some of the experiences we had this summer in our taking the culture back to Malaysia and then our valuing the culture and then how that was received and that reciprocal experience.
Now, this past summer, Brenda and myself, we brought a team to East Malaysia and we visited the Murut community, which is an indigenous group in East Malaysia, in the island of Borneo. But anyway, when we got up there, before we went, we received songs from them because I deliberately asked, send us some songs that we can sing. We did, so we brought back some arrangements and some of the music and sang. And it affirmed who they are. And if you speak to the leaders, this was the first time that they have white people sing their song. It's never happened before because the leader says, William Lowe says, every time missionaries come or when they come and visit, church leaders from elsewhere come and visit, they want to teach us their song. But through us, the Baylor team, we've learned our own song. that our own song is very good. So that makes a big impact. Asians and non-North Americans value the opinions and the words that you bring, the teachings that you have. If you just tell them, God loves your music, God values your music, can we hear your music? It brings them into a soul-searching spin about who they are.
So let me resonate that point. My in-laws were for 22 years missionaries in Colombia, South America. And they have story after story of missionary groups, church youth groups, whatever, coming down to serve with them for these short-term trips. And 22 years when they came down to bring the American culture to them or sing the songs and so forth, it was received and it was welcomed, but it was a completely different experience when they came down to fit into their culture. And it was always much more open, always much more well received, and changed lives in a way that was measurably different. And so that's a very...
Well, this summer when our students led out in a worship experience by playing a gong prelude, the whole dynamic of the village shifted.
We did something similar in Cuba. We went to Cuba this summer, and lo and behold, Lifeway Worship has about 20 Cuban choruses with tracks and everything just like the others. And they're original Cuban. I didn't recognize one of them. And so we learned several of them when we went down, and it meant a lot to that congregation that we were singing there, because they were in the Cuban hymnal. It immediately bonded the two groups. It was really cool.
It's the same thing with Koreans. I'm not sure whether you realize, but Koreans do not sing Korean songs in church. They sing translated Korean songs.
Yeah, the only experience really, I'm sorry to say, that I've had of being in another culture and worshiping and being involved in their music was several years ago when I went to Nigeria to teach at the seminary there, and I noticed that in the chapel services, and the problem of Western missionaries influencing the music of other countries has been going on for 200 years, it's nothing new, but in the chapel services and in the churches that we visited, they sang Western music. In the chapel services, they sang out of the old Baptist, the 56 Baptist hymnal. Sang it better than I'd ever heard in there, with power and gusto, and but it was in the informal gatherings that I heard the local, the indigenous music, folk music. With informal gatherings of Christians, sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning when the power was out and you were sweating and the windows were open, music went on all the time. That was when I heard the indigenous music, not in the church services, it was in the local gatherings. And of course my thought was, and I asked the students there when I was teaching, how do we assemble this music? I mean, because some of it, they said, it's not written down, it's just folk music, and we just sing it at our gatherings. Okay, how do we begin then gathering that and making a collection or even they don't even have their own hymnal there, that is yours, that is your music, and but there's a disconnect, I think, in the established church and then just the local gatherings.
I was going to bring this back to a local context. I agree with Lee a lot that people who are younger and students like me don't really have a sense of, by and large, how the musical style that they are using affects everything that they're doing meaning-wise, as regards their identity and their culture. So, like you said, Swee Hong Lim, contrafactor doesn't really work so much, just because so much culture is tied into the actual music that's being used. But I think it's I think the problem for students in North America is that they are not taught to have that awareness about their own particular musical cultures. So you kind of can slip and slide between various musics and not realize what a profound impact that will have on you over the course of your life. And I think there are no Catholics in the room, I don't think. or at least nobody that teaches at a Catholic institution. But that we can learn a lot from what Catholics have been starting to learn, because by nature of their church, they're more global than any Protestant body. You know, and Ansgar Chipungo was talking about these issues of enculturation a long time ago. And I think it's on us to bring those to students and have them read that, to bring first awareness about themselves, and then to bring awareness about the sometimes patronizing nature of music being brought into a culture rather than allowing it to spring up, and that it'll permeate the world slowly as people become more aware of that in their own community.
So we have just a couple of moments before we go to the next part of this session, session 2. So I wonder if we could conclude by just offering, just brainstorm some ideas of how do we apply this? The first thing that comes to mind is I need to collaborate. I need to get my program to collaborate with some of your programs and put together some travel opportunities for our students to travel around various parts of various continents, and just first of all open their eyes to that, open my own eyes to some of that. That seems like one particular idea. What other applications might we make?
I may be the last one in the room to have read this book, but if you haven't read the book, Translating the Message by Lamin Sana, from Africa, teaches at Yale, one other school. Translating the Message was one of the most important eye-opening books that I have read, and it fits into our conversation. And do you agree, Swee Hong Lim?
Yep.
That's a very helpful book. So I just put that somewhere in your reading list, and some ideas will probably blossom out of that.
Thank you.
He has a shorter book too. That's it's an abridged version of that called "Whose Religion Is Christianity." So if you don't want to read 400 pages, it's 200. So
I'm sure my students would appreciate that.
yeah.
Anyone else? Other applications, ideas that we might throw out?
Are you talking about, Tom, making these things, that idea occurred to me, I'm thinking, should this be curriculum? Should this be something built into our programs, where they spend a semester, or they spend a summer, or they spend an internship, or they do something that need to rise to that level?
It absolutely could. It could also be a travel component to an on-site course. We often will offer a spring course that come at the end of the semester. They get an incomplete, and then in May, we're just going to spend 2 weeks traveling. And just travel around various countries, and then report after that some sort of capstone paper that goes with that, reactions to, whatever.
And we've got a pretty active and lively missionary center, Go Center on campus, the Little Outreach Center, which was started 2 or 3 years ago, and it's really, I mean, they were always doing mission trips, but they really made a concerted effort. I'm going to have to go back and really get with those folks and say, hey, what can we do to be targeted? So.
Yes, sir.
I'd be curious, I know many of our campus life folks send people. How many of us send ensembles abroad? Could we have a show of hands? Most of us? I'm just curious about that. I wonder how much,
and I would,
the frequency of that. You know?
Sorry, I would imagine that we could incorporate with performance tours some experiences like that that would be engaging.
I think it's also critical that we start to change the way we talk about missions and we talk about exchange, and that we really do bring down this, that we are going to help people who are in greater need than we. Because the reality is there's so much to be exchanged, and this idea of hospitality and mutual exchange of gifts and those kind of things is really the mentality that we've got to start embracing.
One of the Stanford University Ministries have a 5-week program in Malaysia that I hope to go on sometime soon. And what they do is they take a small group of students and they offer a series of art exchange, is what they call it. And they have about 4 or 5 different components to that. There's the music, there's photography, there's visual art, there's a sound media kind of thing. And they offer it in conjunction with the university there, where our students simply go and participate in this kind of clinic workshop where they're all making and creating things together. So it's a very different mindset than we're even going to go perform for you, but they're actually doing the work together in that particular context and sort of sharing and exchanging. And that's had multiple blessings that both our students and I think the people from abroad have found.
Let's, for time.